My story begins in the quiet rhythm of a home that, from the outside, appeared perfectly ordinary. I was in my late 30s, married for over a decade, and living a life many would call stable. My husband, Michael, worked long hours at his firm, and I managed both my part-time teaching job and the responsibilities of our household. Together, we shared a roof, a bank account, and polite conversations at dinner, but the warmth of our marriage had thinned over the years. There were no loud arguments, no open hostility, just silence where there used to be laughter, and distance where there once was closeness. It was during this quiet season of my life that Daniel entered our home. He was 19, tall and soft-spoken, carrying the kind of guarded expression one often sees in young people who have already known too much hardship. He came to us through a foster program that aimed to help teenagers transition into adulthood. At first, he kept mostly to himself, speaking only when necessary, as if afraid that any word might expose his vulnerability. I tried gently to break through his shell. Simple questions over dinner, reminders that he was welcome to treat our house as his own, and small gestures like leaving a light on when I knew he would come home late. Slowly, Daniel responded. He began to linger in the kitchen when I cooked, asking about recipes, or he would quietly help carry groceries without being asked. There was a politeness to him, a quiet gratitude that made me want to protect him even more. Michael, though supportive of the idea of fostering, remained distant. He provided financially, nodded in agreement when I updated him on Daniel's progress, but he rarely engaged with the boy beyond surface-level exchanges. It frustrated me at times, but it was not new. Michael had been withdrawing for years, retreating into work as if the office were safer than the messiness of family. Daniel, however, began to gravitate toward me. At night, when Michael buried himself in spreadsheets, Daniel would sometimes sit at the dining table with me, his textbooks spread out while I graded papers. We didn't speak much at first, but the silence was companionable. There was something unspoken in those moments, a fragile sense of belonging that seemed to comfort us both. I told myself it was simply the bond of care, the instinct a mother develops for a child who needs her. And for a while, I believed it wholeheartedly. I saw him as the son I never had, a young man who needed guidance, affection, and stability. But there were small, almost imperceptible moments that unsettled me. The way his eyes lingered when I praised him, or how his smile carried an intensity that felt too earnest. I brushed these thoughts aside, convincing myself that it was nothing more than my imagination. Looking back now, I realize that those were the first cracks, the quiet beginnings of a story I never intended to write, that as the weeks turned into months, Daniel's presence in the house began to feel natural, almost indispensable. What had started as polite exchanges evolved into genuine companionship. He laughed more often now, a sound that surprised me the first time I heard it, bright and unguarded. I found myself looking forward to those moments, as though his laughter filled a space inside me that had been empty for too long. Michael, meanwhile, grew increasingly absorbed in his work. He often left before sunrise and returned long after dinner, carrying exhaustion like a second skin. Our conversations dwindled to logistical updates, bills, schedules, grocery lists. At times, I felt invisible to him, a figure existing only to keep the house in order. The void his absence left was not just physical, it was emotional. It was Daniel who noticed first. One evening, as I sat staring blankly at a book I could not bring myself to read, he asked softly, "Are you okay?" The concern in his voice startled me. Michael hadn't asked me that in years. I brushed off his question with a smile, but he didn't look convinced. From then on, he watched me with a quiet attentiveness that both comforted and unsettled me. Our late-night routines became more frequent. He would spread his notes across the dining table while I graded assignments, and our conversations drifted beyond school and work. He spoke of his childhood, the foster homes, the constant goodbyes, the feeling of being disposable. I listened, not just as his guardian, but as someone who understood loneliness in her own way. In turn, I confessed pieces of my own life. The dreams I had set aside, the silence that had crept into my marriage. Those talks left me conflicted. Part of me felt the natural affection of a caregiver, proud that he trusted me enough to share his wounds. Yet another part, one I was ashamed to acknowledge, felt something deeper stirring. There was a gentleness in the way he regarded me, a kind of reverence that went beyond gratitude. His words lingered long after our conversations ended, echoing in the quiet spaces of my heart. I tried to reason with myself. He was my foster son, and I was his guardian. That boundary was clear, unshakable. But boundaries are fragile when tested by emotion. Sometimes it was in the way his eyes sought mine when he laughed, or how his voice softened when he said goodnight. Small things, almost invisible, but together they formed a weight I could not ignore. One evening, as I gathered my papers, he paused mid-sentence and said, "You're the only person who's ever made me feel like I matter." The words struck me like a stone dropped in still water, sending ripples through every layer of my restraint. I forced a smile, but my heart was racing, torn between duty and desire. That night, as I lay in bed beside Michael's steady breathing, I realized the truth I had been avoiding. Something was changing, and I no longer knew how to stop it. The evening that altered everything began innocently enough. Rain lashed against the windows, the wind rattling the shutters as though the house itself were restless. Michael had left earlier that morning for a 3-day business trip, and the emptiness of the house pressed in on me. Daniel offered to keep me company for dinner, insisting we cook together rather than order takeout. We moved about the kitchen in rhythm, chopping, stirring, laughing at small mistakes. The sound of his voice felt louder against the storm outside, and for a while I allowed myself to forget the unease that had been growing between us. When the meal was ready, we ate at the dining table side by side, the flickering candles casting shifting shadows on the walls. As the night deepened, conversation grew more personal. Daniel spoke of the fear he carried, that he would never truly belong anywhere, that one day even we would send him away. I assured him he was safe, that he had a place in our home for as long as he needed. My words were meant to comfort, but the way he looked at me in that moment was not the way a son looks at a mother. His gaze lingered, unwavering, filled with a depth I could not ignore. Silence stretched between us, heavy and charged. I rose to clear the dishes, but he reached out, his hand brushing against mine. The touch was brief, accidental perhaps, but it left me motionless. My breath caught, and when I looked up, I found him watching me with an honesty that stripped away every excuse I had clung to. "I know I shouldn't say this," he whispered, voice trembling yet firm, "but you mean more to me than anyone ever has." The words cracked something inside me. 1,000 protests rushed to the surface, reminders of boundaries, of morality, of the promises I had made as both wife and guardian. And yet, in that fragile instant, my resolve wavered. Loneliness, long buried, surged to the surface, colliding with the warmth of his presence. I tried to step back, to dismiss it as youthful confusion, but he stood and closed the distance. His arms wrapped around me in an embrace that was both desperate and tender. I should have pulled away, but instead I let myself sink into it, surrendering to the comfort I had been starved of for years. The world outside blurred into the storm. Inside, the line between right and wrong dissolved. When I finally pulled away, my hands shook. The silence between us was no longer gentle, it was suffocating. What we had shared in that moment could never be undone. That night, as the storm raged on, a different kind of storm had begun inside me. I had crossed a threshold I could never retreat from, and the weight of that choice pressed on me with every heartbeat. It was the beginning of both my greatest comfort and my greatest downfall. The morning after felt strangely hollow. The storm had passed, leaving the air sharp and clear, yet within me everything remained clouded. Daniel avoided my eyes at breakfast, his usual warmth replaced with a nervous quiet. I mirrored his silence, unable to find words that could bridge the gulf created the night before. What had once been a simple bond of trust was now burdened with a secret that neither of us could erase. When Michael returned from his trip, the atmosphere of the house had shifted. He noticed, though I tried to mask it. My smiles came slower, my laughter forced. Daniel lingered less at the table, retreating to his room or vanishing outside for long walks. The fragile balance we had built began to crumble under the weight of guilt. Michael, perceptive in ways I had underestimated, grew suspicious. At first, it was subtle, the way he studied me when I spoke, the sharpness in his questions about Daniel. Then, one evening as I passed the living room, I caught him watching us from the doorway. His expression was not angry, not yet, but searching, piecing together fragments of a truth I prayed he would never uncover. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. Michael had overheard a late-night exchange, Daniel's voice too tender, mine too hesitant. He cornered me in the kitchen, his words clipped, his eyes filled with hurt. "Tell me," he demanded, "tell me there's nothing between you." My mouth opened, but no denial came. The silence was confession enough. The days that followed unraveled everything. Michael withdrew completely, his disappointment colder than anger. Phone calls were made, and before I could fully grasp what was happening, Daniel was reassigned to another home. Watching him leave was like tearing open a wound I had inflicted on myself. He didn't meet my eyes as he walked out the door, and I knew then that whatever comfort we had shared was bound tightly to the pain it left behind. Alone in the aftermath, I faced the ruins of what I had chosen. My marriage, though not yet dissolved, was fractured beyond repair. The boy I had once promised to protect was gone, leaving only echoes of a connection that had crossed unforgivable lines. Nights stretched endlessly, filled with questions I could not answer. Was it love? Was it loneliness? Or was it simply my own weakness disguised as affection? Looking back, I see the truth more clearly. I had mistaken attention for devotion, comfort for love. In reaching for what I lacked, I betrayed both my husband and the very role I had sworn to uphold. The price of that mistake was a home divided, trust shattered, and a heart that would forever carry the scar of betrayal. I tell this story not as an excuse, but as a confession, a reminder of how easily lines can blur when loneliness whispers too loudly. I thought I had found something rare and beautiful, but all I did was destroy the family I already had.